Yes, we're going to hear from Dr. David Hinds first, and then we'll follow up with the other panelists.
Good afternoon, members of Parliament and organizers of the conference, and those of you who've come from far and near, my fellow panelists. I think my task in my 5 minutes is to say some very frank things that only people like myself could say. I want to begin by saying that Guyana is a changed place. Let's stop denying. Guyana is not the Guyana we left 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago. When it was announced that we found oil, that's it. That's it. Everything is before that and after that. And whatever we think about, whether we think about protest, whether we think about revolution, whether we think about change, whether we think about organizing, they have to be done against the backdrop of that fact. And no country has moved from a poor country, the second poorest country in the hemisphere, the fastest growing economy in the world. Things remain the same. So that's, I think we have to begin there. The second thing, and this is something that flowed from that first fact, is that exercise that we had in 2020, in March 2020, was more than an election. It was the reordering of by global, powerful global forces in conjunction with national actors. Guyana is sitting next to Venezuela, which has the largest oil reserves in the world. I said it on my program the other day. Guyana has got one of the largest finds in recent times. Oil determines what happens in the world. We are living in the most important neighborhood in the world. The largest oil reserve and the largest oil find in recent times. Just orient our minds to that. What it means, therefore, who governs in Guyana is not determined only by Guyanese. Guyanese are perhaps the conduit to determining who governs. And in 2020, a convergence of forces hastily put together determined who governs. Don't quote me, quote the United States Department that said the 2020 elections were disputed and the government was installed. People say it as if the PNC came up with those terms, or the APN. You know, it was the US State Department, 1 year after the government was installed, that said it was a disputed election and the government was installed, not elected. The Americans said that. It was one of the few elections at any time in modern history where a powerful global force sanctioned one of the actors before the results were announced. You all bear that in mind. You don't happen, you sanction people after the election finish, you say, well, you rigged, I'm going to sanction you. Here is at the top level, the third in command in the most powerful country in the world, the third in command, sanctioning in the name of the most powerful country in the world, one actor in a contest of two actors. It means, therefore, that the outcome of the election was determined by powerful forces. When you bear that in mind, all the talk that we are talking here ought to change. Ought to change. I have studied countries where regime change happened. And what happens after that is the government that comes into power is given a blank check. A blank check. Everything else closes down. A blank check. That's what the PPP has in there. And that's what my colleagues have been trying in their own way, their own diplomatic way to say. As I said, I have the burden of saying it undiplomatically. The PPP has got the blank check. And when you give a state with a history of authoritarianism, and with that amount of resources that can be used, mentioned, when you give that state a blank check, you are playing with murder. And that's what's happening in Guyana today. I say that to say that at my age, I can call myself a recovering revolutionary. So I know something about making revolution. You're not making no revolution there. Or you're not making it the old way. You have to make revolution the new way. And I can tell you, as someone who wakes up every day, my first job, not my second job. My second job pays me and feeds me and houses me. But my first job is to work for that revolution in a new way. Sisters and brothers, we've been doing that. These comrades can tell you, as you walk around Guyana today, it's not the same place it was 3 years ago. People have a level of consciousness. Because what you see, the level of authoritarianism in itself breeds consciousness. And it throws up new ways of protesting. All you all here, everybody tell me, Dr. I don't miss one of your shows. And the reason you're doing that is that we have reoriented our way of fighting. And we are first, I think it's Aubrey said it, no, consciousness. No revolution happens if you don't fight for the minds of the people. And we had to begin that all over again 3 years ago. So you all cool it a little bit on the Guyanese people. They're dealing with circumstances which we have to begin to orient ourselves to understanding. Now, what does a blank check mean? And I take 2 extra minutes. Blank check means that the winner-take-all system, which depended on an understanding that the opposition will play a role. That's what make winner-take-all work. Because you win and you take all, but you have an unwritten pact, an unwritten understanding that the opposition has a role to play here. And that if the opposition doesn't play a role, you are not likely to hold on to your power either the next election or by people coming onto the streets. That system is broken down. It has broken down. This government has taken over every inch of political space. Every single inch of political space. None is left in the formal system for the opposition. When you put that together, with a political party that has always believed in domination. A political party that always believed in domination. And that comes from deep within the thinking of the PPP. Some people blame it on communism. Some people blame it on a deep understanding of what Mr. Nandela called good over evil. In the 2020 election, not me, Mr. Nandela said this is a struggle of good over evil. The PPP is good and the rest of us are evil. The rest of us, in their estimation, cannot exist in a state of freedom. And so therefore, we cannot govern. And if we cannot govern, it means it is the manifest destiny of the PPP to govern. So they come to government with that mindset. And now they're given a blank check to put it into practice. Next, give me one more minute. Next, in ethnic societies, some groups wait for the opportune moment to use the state as a means of exacting revenge. Note the narrative of the PPP. We were rigged for 28 long years. We were denied what is ours. Aha! Now we have a blank check. We are going to exact revenge. You put all of that together and you see what is playing out in Guyana. It means, therefore, we have to move differently. You see, David Patterson was not let out of Guyana, just as his great-great-great-great-grandparent was not let out of the plantation. You have to seek permission. You all draw the narratives. Eh? You see, we have to understand the gravity of the situation that we are dealing with. And then once we understand that, then it's able, I'm telling you all, the people in Guyana understand it because they live it every single day. And I am not an elected official, never been. And when I walk, they come in my ears, they pull me aside, and they whisper, thanks for opening up our eyes. Now that we see the light, let us stand up for our rights. But see the light first. That is extremely important. We've got to see the light. And this conference must contribute to that seeing of the light. If we get in front of the revolution, there will be no revolution. We have to contribute towards opening up the way. Somebody said it. I think Dr. Adam said it, that we out here, we have a pivotal role to play. Check all the great upheavals in modern history. The diaspora played an important part. Whatever, whether it's the Cuban Revolution or the Haitian Revolution or whatever revolution, right? Those who were not at the center played an important role. These weren't the remarks I intended to make, but I felt I had to make them so as to let us frame our discourse as we go forward in these 2 days in that way, understanding that we're no longer little Guyana. We are no longer this little country that people just know for Jonestown. Jonestown is now gone. The world is knowing us now for something else. And we got to begin knowing ourselves that way and orienting our minds that way. And I'm sure that if we do that, those people in Guyana who fought battles from the Middle Passage coming right through, they will be ready to fight the battle.
Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. You've heard him, Professor Dr. David Hines, addressing the Washington Conference in Guyana last month. He joins me now to talk about the Washington Conference and also Venezuela, the Venezuela Guyana impasse, that large influx of Venezuelan refugees that are entering Guyana, what are the implications, and so on. And so Dr. David Hines will be joining me now. Dr. David Hines, welcome to Voice of the Diaspora. I can see you clearly there. You are on air. Our viewers have had the opportunity to listen to your full presentation at the Washington Conference in September. Of course, the PPP would have said that the Washington Conference was unsuccessful, and also the opposition visiting senior operatives in the U.S. government, Hakeem Jeffries and others, congressmen and women, that the opposition did not have the opportunity to sit down with them. We know that that is not true. So I want to welcome you and let us go straight into the discussion. The Washington Conference, Dr. Hines, let us talk a bit about it.
Greetings, Brother Norman, and greetings to your audience. It's been a little while since I've been on, and I apologize for a couple of times you hit me up, but I couldn't make it. And of course, that was not because I didn't want to make it, but sometimes there are these clashes. But I'm glad to be on. I'm always glad to be on because you are doing part of the work that we all have to do, and people like myself should always support what you're doing with our presence and whatever little insights we could bring to bear on the situation. So I'm very happy to be here. Your question about the Washington conference, one, that the PPP said it was unsuccessful, and what is my own view of that? Well, if the PPP says it's unsuccessful, it means that it was successful. Let's start there. The PPP is never going to deem anything that its detractors, its opposition, deem as successful. Anything that they do, they are going to deem as unsuccessful. And oftentimes, we evaluate political action not just by how we feel about it, but how those to whom it is directed feel about it. And the PPP, once this conference was called, preempted the conference by going to Washington themselves and making the wrongs, using the power of state and government to make the wrongs in Washington. And that was a tacit and not so tacit acceptance that this initiative taken by Brother Burke and his organization had the potential of bringing to bear on the situation an international gaze that no errant government, no dictatorship likes. No dictatorship likes an international gaze. And so they understood the importance of us gathering in Washington, D.C., and speaking to representatives of the US government. Why they recognize the importance of that? They used that tactic and strategy, because it was both a strategy and a tactic, very, very effectively between 2015 and 2020. When the coalition came to government in 2015, it made the error of believing that it was just another government and didn't realize that in the historical evolution of Guyana, a coalition government beating the PPP in 2015 was, in many respects, a revolutionary development. For the first time electorally, you found that the three major ethnic groups voted in the same way. Vast majority of African Guyanese voters, a critical mass of Amerindian voters, and more than a normal sprinkling of East Indian voters or Indian Guyanese voters. And that in an election brought a non-PPP government to power. That in itself is massive. And so therefore, if a government comes to power as a result of that combination of voters, that government ought to ask itself, what has changed in Guyanese society? And if it asks itself what has changed in Guyanese society, it then must say, as a government, how should we respond to what has changed? The second thing the coalition government did not realize was that when they came to power in 2015 and it was declared that Guyana had found oil, that everything had changed in our country, every single thing. The finding of oil in 2023 in the contemporary world, in a country like Guyana, means that every single thing is turned upside down its change. So the coalition did not understand its own historical place in our long arc of history, and it did not understand what the finding of oil immediately means for Guyana. So when you put those two things together, the coalition was operating as a normal government when the situation had changed fundamentally and drastically around it. The PPP had a keener understanding of those two factors. And it recognized that the only way you're going to turn that back is that you had to have the intervention of forces in the society and outside of the society in an abnormal way. That you were not going to beat back that historical development in the form of the coalition by just a simple going to the poll at the next election. That you had to remove them in ways that are deemed quote unquote acceptable, but that are outside of the normal way of removing governments. And the PPP embarked on regime change. And one of the things that they did is that they sought the intervention of the most important external forces and actors. They recognized in an oil regime with Exxon finding oil in Guyana that the United States becomes number one player, external player. They recognize with finding oil and Venezuela next door, and I see you are to speak about Venezuela.
Yes.
Venezuela next door, it brings the United States into Guyana through oil. It brings the United States into Guyana through Venezuela. And so therefore, you had to go and begin to court the United States. And the PPP raised tens of millions of dollars, and they went to Washington, and I don't use the word lobby. They engaged the United States government at several levels. They engaged them at the level of the Congress people. They engaged them at the level of the executive, the State Department, and they engaged them at the level of state government. And they sold the Americans a narrative. And the narrative they sold them was that this group that is in power is an undemocratic group. They have a history of rigging elections. They are not fit to govern. They are prone to violence. Now, if you are American, that kind of language, these people don't play by the rules. They rig elections. They're prone to violence. And you are saying, we have investment there. We want a government there that is going to be friendly to us when we are dealing with Venezuela. This narrative of these people that the PPP is painting is not nice. And the coalition could not fight back because it had no knowledge that this was going on. And so the PPP was able to speak the language that the Americans wanted to hear and sell them a narrative of the coalition. And in the end, we knew what happened. There was the regime change started with a no confidence vote. The vote was carried out by Mr. Sharon Das. We know the role that the Canadian government played, and we can imagine what other governments played behind the scene. We fast forward to the election itself. When the election was not going according to script for the regime changers, they saw the intervention at the highest level of the greatest country in the world, at the level of the State Department, the Secretary of State. And I understand it even went higher than that. But I'm not prepared to say that because I have no public proof that official higher than the Secretary of State intervened. But we know the Secretary of State intervened because that was public. Now, when the Secretary of State, who is the number one, number two, number three, number four in line in the government, intervenes in a small country in an election before the results were announced, this is critical. The United States put sanctions on one contestant before the election was announced. Normally, when you're sanctioning parties and contestants, you wait until the election is over and a government doesn't want to get out of power, having been voted out of power, you say you put sanctions on them, as they did with the Venezuelans. All right? Not the case in Guyana. Here are two contestants in an election that is not yet determined. The Americans at the level of the Secretary of State says, I'm putting sanctions on you, in effect saying that we are determining who won the elections. The rest is history. And as I said in that presentation, that if we don't take that narrative into consideration, we're wasting our time. No. So the PPP understands the effect of what we eventually figured out that needs to be done. And here is what put them on the back foot. We were seeking entry to the American government via the Congressional Black Caucus. There are several points of entry to American government. It's a fascinating government framework. You have about 20, 30 points of entry to American government, right? Because of its makeup. It has municipal government, county government, state government, and so on and so on, right? We were seeking entry through the Congressional Black Caucus that is made up of over 50 representatives of the African American community. Now, we in Guyana and the Caribbean have an historical relationship with the Black community in the United States of America, and hence its elected representatives. Some of those representatives have Caribbean roots. They come from Caribbean family. The point I am making is they understand the language that we are using in terms of making our case. They have more than a passing understanding of Guyana. They know where it is on the map. They know who lives there. They know its history. So in going through the Black Caucus, we are going through a section of the US government that doesn't have to go and do its homework on Guyana and the Caribbean. And the PPP knows that. And they are mortally afraid of that. And so that conference became a victory for the opposition before the conference began. The PPP went there, they tried to do their stuff and so on. But at the end of the day, we had the last say. And we went there, we made our case at the conference itself. And I'm reliably informed that over 500,000 people viewed the proceedings of that conference. That's almost the population of Guyana living in Guyana. That's a lot of people. So, the issue is now viral. Now, when you have 500,000 people who viewed in real time, you are talking about 5 times that who are going to view it in time to come, as the Calypsonian would say. And then we went on Capitol Hill and at 2 meetings. This is often lost. They're talking about one meeting, the meeting with the parliamentarians. We had a second meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus and Brother Hakeem Jeffries, with the non-parliamentarians that included people like myself. So we had 2 bites of the cherry, you see? And we were able to bring to bear 2 perspectives, the perspectives from the elected officials and then the perspectives from the non-elected officials that included people with professional understanding of issues. Dr. Vince Adams was able to speak on oil. I was there, my own training as an educator, a scholar, on the way a government works. We were able to bring all of that to bear on the second meeting. So we give more than a mouthful to the Black Caucus. And if you are the PPP, you're scared to hell about that. One, because these are the people, the American government, who helped to bring you to power. Now your detractors are going to the American government and saying, okay, here is what happened. You intervened in 2020. 1 year later, you shocked the world when you said the election that you intervened in was disputed and the government that you put in power was installed. So you, Mr. America, Miss America, you have admitted that the government in our country that you helped to put there is an illegitimate government. Now, note my word. I'm saying illegitimate. I'm not saying illegal, because in the context of our law, the government was sworn in, so it's a legal government. But it's an illegitimate government, and the Americans said that by saying the elections were disputed. Not in America. They're fighting over their 2020 election that almost toppled their government.
Yes.
And the issue for them is whether their 2020 election was disputed or not. The Trump people are saying it was disputed, and they're now in court, so they understand. They understand what happened in Guyana.
Yes.
Understand that. So we are going to them, and I want to say this, Brother Norman, before you come in, because this is very important. We said to Brother Jeffries and his compatriots in the second meeting that we do not come to Washington to ask you to become overly involved in Guyanese politics. We do not come here to ask for regime change. We come here to make our case to you as an important stakeholder who can influence the actors in Guyana, right? We do not want regime change. I know we said that because I said it on behalf of the group, right? So we wanted to be very clear what we were doing. We were not doing what the PPP did. They came to you and asked you for regime change. We are coming to you and asking you to reverse regime change. Use your influence to reverse regime change.
Dr. David Hines here on Voice of the Diaspora, a professor at State Arizona University, professor in African Studies. Dr. David Hines is also the host of Politics 101, a very, very informative program. And I would ask my viewers to tune in. He will tell you when it's on and so on. But it's very, very informative. And Dr. Hines would give you the history and he would give you the current dynamics of what is happening in Guyana politics, the cultural situation, the political situation, so on. And I want young people to really view Dr. Hines' program. Dr. Hines, still on the Washington conference, we saw and heard after the conference that the PPP government said that those who were at the conference, those who participated in that conference, were supporting someone who is an extremist and also a wanted person. And we saw recently in the Stabroek News, one of our more prominent newspapers in Guyana, the editorial, one of the editorials, parroting that same view that Rickford Burke, who is the president of one of the organizations that organized that conference, and that Burke is leaning, though he's a good lobbyist, he's leaning in the direction of an extremist sort of approach. And what are your thoughts on that? Were you supporting an extremist leader at the Washington conference? And
Well,
what would
depend
you
on
say to
what
Starbucks News
extremism
on?
on what? Depend on extremists on what? Martin Luther King was an extremist when it came to nonviolent and civil disobedience. He was an absolutist on that. He was an extremist on that. You know, look, look. What does Stabroek News mean by extreme? Extremist. Let me try to put it in context.
Yes.
Stabroek News is playing a role. Let me say, Stabroek News played a role, has always played a role when it comes to issues of social justice in Guyana. In 2020, they played a role in the regime change. They endorsed the narrative by the PPP that the election, there was an attempt to rig the election. All right? And so that was the PPP's accusation. There was also another dimension to the election that Stabroek News has ignored to this day. And that is something unprecedented that happened. The boxes were opened before the results were announced. And the Guyana and the rest of the world got a chance to see what was in the boxes. And we knew some of the things we knew that was in the boxes. There were 4,000 and odd votes, equivalent of one seat, that people who were not in the country, their votes were in there. We got to know that there were 48 boxes with no statutory document. The Stabroek News has ignored that part. They embrace the accusation of attempted rigging, and they ignored the actuality of rigging. The actuality of rigging, they ignored it. So Stabroek News, like a lot of those people who jumped the gun in 2020, they find themselves in this quandary where there is evidence of rigging, which they ignored. They have an accusation of attempted rigging, which they embrace. And so they found themselves in this quandary, and they don't know how to get themselves out of it. To the credit of Stabroek News and Kaito News, which also embrace rigging, they have recognized the consequences of an installed government. And the consequences is this runaway government with a blank check that I talked about at the conference. And they are opposing that government in many regards. But they have to be careful about how they oppose this government because they help to bring the government to power. They, in a sense, give the government its democratic credentials. And now the government is behaving in the most undemocratic manner. They're in a quandary, right? So they are tiptoeing around the government. They are not able to call the government and pull the lever on the government because they have already crowned the government to be a democratic government. And this is their dilemma, right? And the government is behaving in the most undemocratic way. but they have to constantly say the government is democratic. Rickford Burke doesn't have that burden. Rickford Burke is operating from the standpoint that this government is an undemocratic government from the beginning. It's an installed government, it's an illegitimate government, and you respond to illegitimate governments differently from you respond to democratic governments. And in that sense, Rickford Burke is extreme on the right side of history. On the right side of history. When Stabrook News talked about extremism, they're comparing Rickford, who is not shackled, and so therefore he can be extreme on the side of justice and what is right. They are shackled. They're shackled by that mistake they made in 2020. And so they therefore cannot be extreme on the side of justice. And so, yes, Rickford is extreme on the side of right, on the side of justice, on the side of fairness, on the side of equitability. And I support that. I support that. So I always say, do not always allow your detractors to define you. If they want to say that you are extreme, you change the meaning of extremism. And that is what I'm doing here this morning. We are extreme when it comes to an understanding that this government is undemocratic. The government is practicing a kind of extremism that assaults the human dignity. It is not Rickford Burke who is dismantling people's homes in Moko. That's extremism against human dignity. It is not Rickford Burke that is presided over the killing of Orrin Boston and Quindon Bacchus, taking their lives indiscriminately. That is extremism against human dignity. It is not Rickford Burke that is overseeing the police beating Indian sugar workers in the Barbies because they're asking for severance. It is the PPP government. That is an extremism against the human dignity of their own supporters. It is not Rickford Burke that is presiding over a regime in which a big shot spits in the face of a defenseless young black woman. It is not Rickford Burke that is carrying out the extreme action of jailing a young female lawyer because she's doing her work. It is not Rickford Burke who is moving poor women from their little stalls in front of the hospital trying to make a living. It is not Rickford Burke that is engaged in the extremism of living on people's homes at Amelia's ward. So there are two extremisms here that Sideshow News needs to get its head around. There's the extremism of the government that they help to install and that they recognize that is now a danger to Guyana. There is that extremism that they need to wrap their mind around. And then there's the extremism of Rickford Burke, which is trying to turn back that authoritarian regime that they need to come on board with. So I just want to put that in context. As I usually say, look, my parents and my auntie and my village and them, they made sacrifices to give me the opportunity to read books at a time when people like myself should not have gotten that opportunity. And I am not going to allow the Stabrook News of this world to take their eyes and pass poor people and black people in Guyana and try to define for ourselves who we are. I am not going to allow the Stabrook News to define me. I will define myself. And if tabloid news want to be objective, it should define the government exactly for what it is.
Dr. David Hines, they're powerful, very powerful. Dr. Hines, for the sake of our viewers, looking at the conference, the Washington conference, we understand that some resolutions were made, and the American government was brought up to speed with the previous PPP government alleged, presiding over the killing of more than 400 African Guyanese in general, and Guyanese in general. Give us a little insight into what was said to the U.S. government, the representatives, and what other issues were raised with them. Poverty. Just give, for the sake of the viewers, what.
Well, some of the things that I recounted just now in my response was said to the American government. We focus on human rights. In the second meeting that I was part of, we focused on human rights. And we were talking to people who understand human rights. Black Americans who every day have to deal with the issue of extrajudicial killings, for example. So when we talk about Orrin Boston being shot in his bed, they know that young lady down there in Kentucky, she was shot in her bed. Her name escapes me for the moment. But I am saying, when we told them what is happening in our country, they understand it, because that is part of what they have to go through in a daily way in America. So when the PPP said the people ask us to provide data and provide evidence, first of all, data and evidence are not necessarily the same thing. Right? Your evidence is when we said to them, there's a place called Moko, where people had their livelihoods, and the government went in there and dismantled their homes in bright day. That is evidence. And even if we didn't have it there, if you wanted it, we could go online.
The recordings are there. The recordings are there.
They're there. So the people didn't have to ask us for evidence. That nonsense that I heard talking about. And let me tell you what the people said. One of the things that we asked for what is a fact-finding mission. We are saying, don't take our word for it. Come down to Guyana and talk to people. Get a sense for your own self. And one of the representatives said to me, she said, exactly, what we want you all to do is to assemble all this evidence in one place, get it to us, because that is what we will have to use to give to the State Department to justify why we are going to Guyana for this finding. So the people didn't ask us for evidence. The people said, what we would want is you to assemble the evidence that you've given us here, right? And, get it from your human rights organizations, from IPADG, that you all have told us they have all this evidence that they present to the United Nations. All right, we are not going to go to the United Nations and ask for the evidence that IPADG give you. We want you to take that evidence. I'm laughing because, it's so elementary.
It's elementary,
right?
Yeah.
We want you to put that thing in one place and give. It's like I come to you and I said, Brother Norman, look, these people have done so to me. And you said, here, I'm going to play it on the program, put it on a drum drive and send it to me.
Yeah.
That is not evidence. So we talked to them about human rights. And they were very, very serious about human rights. I can tell you. You can see it in their body language, in their faces. My understanding, I wasn't at the meeting with the MPs, but the MPs talked to them about systemic discrimination. Discrimination in the parliament, discrimination in terms of policy and contracts and so on. Now, Cathy Hughes presented that whole thing that her husband Nigel used, researched and put, in fact, she didn't get a chance at the conference to finish it because it was so long. If the people wanted quote unquote evidence, she could have handed them that from right
But that's
there.
real evidence. That's real evidence. Yes.
Evidence.
Yeah.
So the evidence in terms of contracts, in terms of the systemic discrimination, we talk to them about that, and we talk to them about human rights violations. And it is those two sets of evidence that we were able to bring to bear. And I tell you, brother, I was in that room. I was sitting 1, 2, 3 persons away from Mr. Jeffries and the other. So I wasn't far away. So people say, well, David Hines only and seen properly, right? You know, I was almost to the front there. And I could see the body language of those people. And I knew that we made our case to them. And in any case, one of them said to us, what you all are telling me here in an official way, I hear it every week unofficially because my hairdresser is a Guyanese.
Wow. I just showed the photo there with you standing with Hakeem Jeffries for the viewers to see. You and others, I just really showed the photo there. Dr. Hines, before we move to the Venezuela situation, the Venezuela-Guyana situation, a quite serious situation that I would like you to put into perspective. I know that an AFC member of parliament, Mr. Patterson, was stopped from leaving Guyana. He eventually got to leave, but he was barred by the PPP government, and I'm not saying allegedly. You understand? They had a hand in instructing the airport security and others to ensure that he did not travel at the time he was ready to travel. I am aware also that myself and yourself, Rickford Burke, and I think Melly Mel are under some kind of probe for crimes and a number of other things. You know, by the Commission of Racial Equality, of course, directed by the PPP. But you have you gone to Guyana since the Commission of Racial Equality wanted to interview you and just give us a little outline on that.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that question. I was in Guyana when the ERC wanted to see me. I came back to America and saw them send
Ethnic Relations Commission. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah. I was in Guyana. I was in Guyana for 4 months, from May to August. I do that every year. And then I go back to Guyana at the end of the year. I spend another a month and a half to 2 months. I spend a minimum of 5 months per year in Guyana, making that public know. You know, I live in America and Guyana. As you know, the job that I do allows me, you know, holidays, what they call, but not holidays, because it's a time for me to do my research and all those kinds of, and I spend that time in Guyana. All right. So I have been to Guyana, up and down and so on. And I was there when the Ethnic Relations Commission said they wanted to see me, you know. So I just wanted for the record to put that there. Mm-hmm. Now, here is what we are dealing with here in the case of Patterson. But let me say one thing. To give credibility to what I'm going to say about David Patterson's situation. Every time I enter Guyana, the immigration officer has to get permission to let me in that country.
Wow.
The immigration officer, I can hear them communicating, and then I hear clear. And then once they say clear, the immigration officer will hand me my passport, Dr. Hines, because most they recognize me. Dr. Hines, you know, have a wonderful stay home. And I would say, sorry for putting you through. Sometimes I have to apologize to people behind me because I have to take longer than the normal. Right. So I know that you are not able to pass immigration if you are on a watch list.
Yes.
I'm on a watch list, and I cannot pass immigration. No, I can't go through immigration and then somebody run behind me in the baggage area and say, "Oh, Dr. Hines, come back. We were not supposed to allow you to pass," something like that. What they're telling us is that David Patterson went through immigration, was sitting in the lobby waiting to board the plane. Somebody comes to him and said, "By the way, you're on a watch list," and we now discover it. If you are on a watch list, it's in that computer before the immigration officer.
Yes, it would flag. Yeah.
It would flag and they would stop you there.
Yes.
What happened is somebody saw David Patterson there, or they may have sent through the instructions to stop him. It didn't get into the computer. And then they realized the mistake. So they had to go and stop him. So that's the authoritarianism. That's the dictatorship.
Yes.
And then the lying that comes with it. But as we black people would say, there'll be storm in the night, but joy cometh in the morning. We were in Washington when they were carrying out this act, and we were able to let 500,000 people know this is what the government was doing. We were able to get government officials in Washington to know this is what the government was doing. And they quickly had to put their tail between their legs and let that man go. Let my people go. All right? So that's the overcoming. So the Patterson situation shows dictatorship at its worst, and it shows overcoming at its best. There is hope in struggle. If we were not in Washington dramatizing our story in public, nothing like David Patterson would have been allowed to leave that country. We won. But in order to win, sometimes you have to go through the agony.
Yes.
The agony of denial before you win. And as you made reference to my program, all of us have programs. You have your program, we have about 10, 15 of these programs.
Yes.
I have decided my program will play a particular role, and you describe it there beautifully.
Yes.
Which shows that you're a keen observer. We all should not be doing the same thing the same way. All right? And so I decide my program is going to be the program of a little bit of teaching, a little bit of giving the history, and so on. Because when we put all of it together, we put you and Sherrod and myself and Kedaki and Mark and Rickford and all of us together, is the real deal.
Yes.
Because you get everything. You get 10 fingers instead of one finger doing the thing. And so I use my program to do exactly that, to say, look, what we are going through here now is what our foreparents went through. Our foreparents could not leave the plantation without permission. If they were found leaving the plantation, they'd be beaten, a finger cut off, an ears cut off. And it's the same thing that you're seeing here now. The Guyana today is the ultimate replica of what the slave plantation used to be. You see? And so therefore, what Brother David went through is akin to what his foreparents went through. As Brother Bob Marley would say, no chains on my feet, but still I'm not free. And as you know, my brother, history, and the spoken word is one of the great weapons. Dr. Martin Luther King created a revolution in part by great oratory.
Yes.
When he spoke, he brought people out from their condition of despair, from their condition of fear. He drew them from the brink of cowardice into the ring of combat. He inspired children, 8, 9, and 10 years old, to stand up to Bull Connors. Those are ringing and graphic examples of revolution in action, you see. And so, don't believe the PPP is that stupid, that they don't understand that what you do when you sit in your living room and go in front of your computer, they understand damn well what you are doing.
Yes.
Sometimes we have to bring our people along and to say, hey, don't worry this thing about we don't have boots on the ground. Sometimes I agree that we should have some more actual boots on the ground. But we have some proverbial boots on the ground every single day. We have some metaphorical boots on the ground and they're mashing the hell out of the PPP. So I know what people want, boots on the ground, and I'm the first person to say you can't run a struggle against a dictatorship without having people on the streets. You see? We can dispute about what we do when we go on the street, right? But I think one of the errors and the shortcomings, let me take back the term error. One of the shortcomings of our present struggle is that we have not found creative ways, as I said in my presentation, of fighting the revolution in a new way. In that we are up against a new type of regime. This is the first kind of regime. I mean, people say Burnham was bad, but Burnham didn't have a blank check. You know, people say Jack Dio was bad back in the Jack Dio time, but he didn't have a blank check. The Jack Dio Ali regime of today has a blank check. It means, therefore, that it is not that we should not put boots on the ground, but we have to put boots on the ground in a new way.
Yeah.
You see, and I think, and I'm criticizing myself here because I am part of the opposition. We have not yet figured out how to, in a public way, stand up to this regime. And that's why one has to reach across and give Brother Rickford Burt a hug.
Yes.
Because he figured out a way
Yes.
how to put boots on the ground in Washington, D.C. And it's up to the rest of us to figure
world to see, for the whole world to see.
Yes,
and you know, you made a point, Dr. Hines, and you said the PPP, you don't know why they lie so much. And I want to know, in a world where you have information, you have social media, you have evidence, you have things in, you know, there to prove. The PPP came out and said that the opposition did not even get to really meet properly with the congressmen and women, and they were in the corridor, sit down, like how anybody, tourists and that kinds of stuff would be there. And then the evidence came, and they couldn't say anything. Here is a photo of the opposition meeting with Hakeem Jeffries and other members of, you know, the U.S. government. And so Royce Zilford, Cathy Hughes, Aubrey Norton, and Amanzo Walton and others. And it's so sad, Dr. Hines, because it seems that the PPP their backs are against the wall, and so they become so desperate, they become confused. But that is, you know, we understand that. We understand that they have to clutch at straws. Dr. Hines, I want to talk to you about, I want you to talk to the viewers about the Guyana-Venezuela situation. We are aware that thousands of Venezuelans are entering Guyana. Many say as refugees. Some are saying that they're from the intelligentsia of the Venezuelan government. And recently, very recently, we understand that there's been a high presence of the Venezuelan military at our borders with equipment and so on, that indicates some form of, you know, move to aggression and so on. When you look at the Venezuela situation in what is happening, outline to us what are your views as a professor. Uh,
Brother Norman, I'm so glad for that question. I started out this program by saying that the coalition government was not aware of two great developments. That its own coming to power represented a moment in history that should be treated in a particular way. And the second thing, that they had founded oil, which changed up everything. And I'm now going to make a similar criticism of the PPP. Having come to power because of their limited understanding of politics, of international relations, of their own country, they believe their coming to power is just to take revenge on the PNC and to put their friends and their family and think they're making the same mistake that the coalition government make in a different way. There's three realities that we have to bear in mind. One reality is Guyana's history and its composition. What we have in Guyana are competing groups, in particular African Guyanese, Indian Guyanese, and Amerindian Guyanese. We have three competing groups. These are groups that, in their different ways, have been denied. They've made contributions to Guyana, and they've been denied compensation for those contributions. And that in an era of plenty, it's natural for the human being to recognize the opportunity for compensation, right? And so, therefore, groups in society always make demands on the government. But now that the government has unprecedented resources, the demands from these groups are going to be more strident. It means that any government has to begin there, has to say, historically, this is where we have arrived. And as a government, we now have to manage the competing demands of the groups in society. And I'm talking about the ethnic groups. But there are also demands from social groups. There are demands from the elites in the society, the Portuguese elite, the mixed elite in the society. There are demands more and more from women in the society. There are demands more and more from young people in the society. So a government has to go to school and do politics 101 all over again to say, we have to manage competing demands. The PPP obviously is not doing that. It is well known. Instead of managing the competing demands, they are meeting 1/5, 1/10 of the way the demands of their own constituency, and they are rubbishing the demands of other groups in the society. But that is for another day. So that's one factor, the internal demands. The other factor is the geopolitical factor that we've alluded to. Here you have powerful countries in the form of companies from America, from China, from Britain, in Guyana. In effect, what you are doing, what Guyana has become, is a theater for geopolitics. You have powerful European countries, the United States, powerful country, China, right there, all right? And they are there in that space. We are now in the middle of the global dispensation. And we always have to be very careful about how we act, because you have China there, you have America there, you have Britain there, you have the Saudis are now there. Now, we would prefer if we were just little Guyana, minding our own business, don't have to worry about nobody said and so on. Unfortunately, oil doesn't permit us to do that. We have to, right? So that's the second factor. The third factor is Venezuela. And everybody talks about the first two factors, but they talk about the Venezuela factor, so it's not an important factor. Venezuela has to be an important factor. It has demands on our territory. It's a clear and present danger that is not going to go away. If the World Court rules, the ICJ rules in our favor tomorrow, Brother Norman, the Venezuelan problem will not go away.
Go away.
We have to. No, the Venezuela problem was there from 1899. The Venezuelans accepted it. Then come 1961. We were approaching independence. The Americans have taken a stand on Guyana. They are going to determine that they don't want a communist government in Guyana. All right? The Venezuelans see that. The Venezuelans and the Americans are allies. The Venezuelans in 61 said, all right, we no longer recognize 1899. I'm making the point that global developments made the Venezuelans change their minds. All right, we've been limping along with that problem from 1961 to now. We found oil. Again, the Venezuelans wake up and say, you have oil there. You bring in the Americans in to exploit this oil. You bring in the British in, all right? On our doorsteps, right? We are not going to stay quiet. We are going to raise our voices. And so you have to take Venezuela into consideration. You don't have to agree with them, but they are an important factor. And we are arguing, my brother, that open bidding for the oil blocks was a mistake. Because the Venezuelans see that, and they're saying, you are opening this bidding to bring these big powers next door to us. You are using oil to play politics against us, and we are going to respond. And they respond. They said they're calling a referendum. They're massing troops on our borders. No, those things may not come to anything tomorrow. But the fact of the matter, the massing of troops there may make our population say, wait a minute, is it the right thing we are doing? They're massing of troops and they're threatening to go to a referendum, not threatening, going to a referendum, can chase away investors. All right? No, the Venezuelans doesn't have to invade us. They can use the threat, chase away investors, destabilize our population, meaning make people in our society say, oh shit, we should not have brought these Americans in. We should not have exploited this oil. They are creating doubts in the minds of our people. So when we are making policy, we have to take into consideration the competing demands of the various groups in Guyana. We have to take into consideration the investors by the big countries, and we have to take into consideration Venezuela. And I don't think this government understands that. No. So Venezuela has to behave in that way for our government to wake up and to realize how serious the threat of Venezuela is. And it still does not realize. No, the Venezuelan opposition and government don't like each other. They behave as mortal enemies. On this issue, they're finding common ground. What the hell is our government doing in terms of common ground in our own country?
Well, I think, not cutting you, Dr. Hines, but what our government is doing, I understand. Well, we understand that in Barima Waini, in Region 1, we have more Venezuelans there now than the Guyanese population there. In Region 7 and a number of us. So I want you to also expand on that before we wrap up. But go ahead. Sorry to cut you there.
I'm coming to that. I just wanted to make the point that when our government is fighting to exclude our opposition from the vital issue of our sovereignty, our territorial integrity, from the vital issue of our resources, the Venezuelans are showing that we can disagree on politics, we can disagree on this, but when it comes to our territorial integrity, we agree in a serious way, not just meeting Aubrey Norton and briefing him. I'm talking about more than that. Anyhow, let's get now to the other thing. Those Venezuelans coming in are serving two purposes in my mind, and both are in the open. One is that they're destabilizing us. As I said before, the Venezuelans doesn't have to invade us with army and military. They're invading us by sending the people into our country. You're old enough to remember when the Americans were turning back Haitians and
Yes.
taking in Cubans. Castro opened the madhouse and the jails and sent them the remember the Mariel boat lift and send them. All of a sudden, Miami crime went up. This Castro sat in there and just said, you all want, let them come.
Let it go.
The PPP wants Venezuelans to come because, in my estimation, the PPP will have to compromise on biometrics.
Yes.
It means, therefore, that they're going to lose. We know from 2020, from what we saw, they got one seat because there was no biometrics. And there may have been more that we were not able to uncover during the recount, right? They will have to compromise on biometrics, in my estimation, so they're going to lose one seat. Where they're going to get that other seat from? They have to that seat that they're losing there, they'll have to figure out where they're getting it from. And I think they've already figured out that if you get people to come into the country, then
process them yes.
It's easy to get a birth certificate. It's easy to do this.
Yeah.
Now, in the process of looking after itself politically in terms of rigging the election, it opens Guyana to destabilization.
Sure.
Along with those potential voters, the Venezuelans are sending in destabilizing elements there. And I think we are in such great danger. Nobody can convince me that those throngs of Venezuelans that are coming in the Northwest there that you mentioned, in Letem every day and so on, that those people who are coming in there, that a critical mass of them are intelligence people who are there to destabilize us. So this PPP is messing us up in two ways. They are using the Venezuelans and the Brazilians and others who are coming in to rig the elections, because that's where I think they're going to get the 2 or 3 extra seats that they're going to lose, because they'll have to agree to biometrics. And they'll get it there. But in the process of doing that, they're opening our country to destabilization. Now, I do not want, my brother, I do not want to stereotype Venezuelans and others. But note, open the newspapers. First of all, crime has gone up, period, in Guyana. But look every day at the instances that are being reported in the paper and see how many of those instances of crimes are purportedly carried out by Venezuelans and Brazilians and so on. Do not believe that those are people just committing normal crimes. A lot of those crimes could be directly and intentionally carried out to destabilize our country.
Yes.
You see, every day I go to that paper. You know, sometimes you open the paper, when you see crime, you look to see if it's black or Indian, or when the common entrance results come out, you look to see how many black children pass. But when I open the papers now and I look in for the reports of murders and so on, I'm looking to see if they're Venezuelans and Brazil, invariably. And I do not believe that a lot of those crimes are just by the way. I think a lot of that, I'm theorizing them. Let me put it that way. I'm theorizing that a lot of those crimes could be directly part of destabilization. Why am I saying that? I go to Jamaica when they were regime change in Manly, right? A reporter would arrive in Jamaica, and he's staying in a villa. And all of a sudden, there is shooting up in that villa. on the night that that reporter arrives there. Bang, 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 gunmen shooting up the villa. The reporter doesn't die, but he leaves Jamaica the next day. And the following day, 80 newspapers is syndicating his report of violence in Jamaica. And that helped to destabilize Manley government and brought down that government. That was part of the regime change. And I think the Venezuelans are doing the same thing to us. So I give that example, not because I'm certain of what I'm saying. I'm theorizing because of my understanding of history and how it operates, right? How these regimes operate, right? That the Venezuelans are not able to invade us because the Americans are there, the British are there, the Chinese are there, and so on, but they're invading us in other ways. One, they're going to determine the results of our elections, because I think the PPP is going to steal 2 or 3 seats from the Venezuelans. And then secondly, they're destabilizing our country. If we have all these murders and crimes, investors are going to say, I'm not coming.
Dr. David Hines here. Now, we have gone over time, but I have made some accommodation for that. It's a very important discourse. Dr. Hines, in your closing remarks, just let our viewers know what time your show is on, and, so that my viewers can pop over to your program and so on.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and so 3 minutes to give your closing remarks, and we wrap up.
All right. It's 7 o'clock Guyana time, Monday through Friday, and that's 7 in Britain. That's Guyana is 5 hours behind, right? So that would be at midnight. UK time, and I do have some loyal UK viewers. You yourself, Norman, I see on from time. And we are eternally grateful for staying up and following our programs. Look, I continue to say that history has given us the burden of constantly having to adjust to the world around us and to influence that adjustment, because often that adjustment around the world is not in sync with our objectives. By our, I mean countries like Guyana and our Caribbean, right? And so, and black people and brown people around the world. And so, given the way in which our history is developed, we are always called upon to rebuke the world. Because the world travels on a plane that does not necessarily carry us along. And you know that old song that we sing, stop that train, stop that train, stop that train, I'm leaving. You know, we are constantly having to stop that train.
Yeah.
And yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
In Guyana.
If you were to say to the young people in Guyana, if you were speaking to the young people across all ethnic groups and so on, what would you say to them if they ask you, is the oil a blessing or a curse for us Guyanese?
I would say it's a blessing for us Guyanese, but blessings don't come just like that. Man, God help those who help themselves. Oil is a blessing for us, but we have to cement that blessing. And the way we cement that blessing is not to leave our political parties. The young people can vote for who they want to vote. That's not my business to tell them who to vote for. If they want to vote for PPP, vote PPP. Vote PNC, vote who you want to vote for. I'm saying to young people, vote for who you want to vote for, but you have to operate at 2 levels at the same time. You have to operate at the level of your party and the level of your country, and do not allow your party to hold you prisoner in your own country. Do not allow your political party to hold you as a prisoner in your own country. You know, you have to, in all instances, find a way to bring together your partisan feelings with your national responsibility. At the end of the day, parties do not exist in a vacuum. Parties exist as part of a country. If there is no country, there is no party. If Venezuela takes 2/3 of our country, Suriname takes the other third, we will be left with parties floating out there and no country. We have to secure our country, and our country has to be a safe space, a place that when the rest of the world turns its back on us, we have a place. And our country should not be in the position that the Gazans, the Palestinians are in, as we speak, in Gaza. We must look at what's happening in Gaza and say, not in our country. And if we allow the PPP to continue the way it's going, it is taking us down the road of Gaza. We have to draw that lesson, and I'll close there.
Dr. David Hines, thank you very much for being here on Voice of the Diaspora. I know that you will be coming back, and I know that you are continuing your work assiduously on your program, and with the Guyanese people and with leaders, Guyanese in the US and back home. You visit quite a lot, and so you are working very, very, very hard. And hopefully, the next time we sit down to talk, we can talk about the role of the opposition in all of this. But that's for another time. Dr. Hines, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, and I will let those who have just joined us have the opportunity to see your presentation at the Washington conference held last month. Thank you once again for being here on Voice of the Diaspora.
And thank you very much.
Yes, we're going to hear from Dr. David Hines first, and then we'll follow up with our panelists.
Good afternoon, members of Parliament and organizers of the conference, and those of you who've come from far and near, my fellow panelists. I think my task in my 5 minutes is to say some very frank things that only people like myself could say. I want to begin by saying that Guyana is a changed place. Let's stop denying. Guyana is not the Guyana we left 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago. When it was announced that we found oil, that's it. That's it. Everything is before that and after that. And whatever we think about, whether we think about protest, whether we think about revolution, whether we think about change, whether we think about organizing, they have to be done against the backdrop of that fact. And no country has moved from a poor country, the second poorest country in the hemisphere, the fastest growing economy in the world. Things remain the same. So that's, I think we have to begin there. The second thing, and this is something that flowed from that first fact, is that exercise that we had in 2020, in March 2020, was more than an election. It was the reordering of by powerful global forces in conjunction with national actors. Guyana is sitting next to Venezuela, which has the largest oil reserves in the world. I said it on my program the other day. Guyana has got one of the largest finds in recent times. Oil determines what happens in the world. We are living in the most important neighborhood in the world. The largest oil reserve and the largest oil find in recent times. Just orient our minds to that. What it means, therefore, who governs in Guyana is not determined only by Guyanese. Guyanese are perhaps the conduit to determining who governs. And in 2020, a convergence of forces hastily put together determined who governs. Don't quote me, quote the United States Department that said the 2020 elections were disputed and the government was installed. People say it as if the PNC came up with those terms, or the APN. You know, it was the US State Department 1 year after the government was installed that said it was a disputed election and the government was installed, not elected. The Americans said that. It was one of the few elections at any time in modern history where a powerful global force sanctioned one of the actors before the results were announced. You all bear that in mind. You don't happen, you sanction people after the election finish, you say, well, you rigged, I'm going to sanction you. Here is at the top level, the third in command in the most powerful country in the world, the third in command, sanctioning in the name of the most powerful country in the world, one actor in a context of two actors. It means, therefore, that the outcome of the election was determined by powerful forces. When you bear that in mind, all the talk that we are talking here ought to change. Ought to change. I have studied countries where regime change happened. And what happens after that is the government that comes into power is given a blank check. A blank check. Everything else closes down. A blank check. That's what the PPP has in there. And that's what my colleagues have been trying in their own way, their own diplomatic way to say. As I said, I have the burden of saying it undiplomatically. The PPP has got the blank check. And when you give a state with a history of authoritarianism, and with that amount of resources that Kathy Hughes mentioned, when you give that state a blank check, you are playing with murder. And that's what's happening in Guyana today. I say that to say that at my age, I can call myself a recovering revolutionary. So I know something about making revolution. You're not making no revolution there. Or you're not making it the old way. You have to make revolution the new way. And I can tell you, as someone who wakes up every day, my first job, not my second job. My second job pays me and feeds me and houses me. But my first job, is to work for that revolution in a new way. Sisters and brothers, we've been doing that. These comrades can tell you, as you walk around Guyana today, it's not the same place it was 3 years ago. People have a level of consciousness. Because what you see, the level of authoritarianism in itself breeds consciousness. And it throws up new ways of protesting. All you all here, everybody tell me, Dr. I don't miss one of your shows. And the reason you're doing that is that we have reoriented our way of fighting. And we have first, I think it's Aubrey said it, no, consciousness. No revolution happens if you don't fight for the minds of the people. And we had to begin that all over again 3 years ago. So you all cool it a little bit on the Guyanese people. They're dealing with circumstances which we have to begin to orient ourselves to understanding. Now, what does a blank check mean? And I take 2 extra minutes. Blank check means that the winner-take-all system, which depended on an understanding that the opposition will play a role. That's what make winner-take-all work. Because you win and you take all, but you have an unwritten pact, an unwritten understanding that the opposition has a role to play here. And that if the opposition doesn't play a role, you are not likely to hold on to your power either the next election or by people coming onto the streets. That system is broken down. It has broken down. This government has taken over every inch of political space. Every single inch of political space. None is left in the formal system for the opposition. When you put that together with a political party that has always believed in domination, a political party that always believed in domination, and that comes from deep within the thinking of the PPP. Some people blame it on communism. Some people blame it on a deep understanding of what Mr. Nandela called good over evil. In the 2020 election, not me, Mr. Nandela said this is a struggle of good over evil. The PPP is good and the rest of us are evil. The rest of us, in their estimation, cannot exist in a state of freedom. And so therefore, we cannot govern. And if we cannot govern, it means it is the manifest destiny of the PPP to govern. So they come to government with that mindset. And now they're given a blank check to put it into practice. Next, give me 1 more minute. Next, in ethnic societies, some groups wait for the opportune moment to use the state as a means of exacting revenge. Know the narrative of the PPP. We were rigged for 28 long years. We were denied what is ours. Aha, now we have a blank check. We are going to exact revenge. You put all of that together and you see what is playing out in Guyana. It means, therefore, we have to move differently. You see, David Patterson was not let out of Guyana, just as his great-great-great-great-grandparent was not let out of the plantation. You have to seek permission. You all draw the narratives. You see, we have to understand the gravity of the situation that we are dealing with. And then once we understand that, then it's able, I'm telling you all, the people in Guyana understand it because they live it every single day. And I am not an elected official, never been. And when I walk, they come in my ears, they pull me aside, and they whisper, thanks for opening up our eyes. Now that we see the light, let us stand up for our rights, but see the light first. That is extremely important. We've got to see the light. And this conference must contribute to that scene of the light. If we get in front of the revolution, there will be no revolution. We have to contribute towards opening up the way. Somebody said it. I think Dr. Adam said it, that we out here, we have a pivotal role to play. Check all the great upheavals in modern history. The diaspora played an important part. Whatever, whether it's the Cuban Revolution or the Haitian Revolution or whatever revolution, right? Those who were not at the center played an important role. These weren't the remarks I intended to make, but I felt